Greetings War Thunderers, this is Longshot with you again with my guide to flying the Mitsubishi J2M2 Raiden in arcade. This Tier 2 plane was introduced in patch 1.70.1945 in May 2015. In the right hands this plane can be untouchable, but it does have weaknesses, a few of which can easily get you killed if you're not aware of them. To start with, I'll look at the armour on this plane. There's hardly any to speak of, just a bit of hardened glass to protect the pilot's head. Shame about the rest of him, I guess. The internals reveals a huge fuel tank right in front of the pilot, which is easily hit from pretty much any angle. You can see how exposed it is in head-ons, from behind, plus there's a couple more in the wings for good measure. The upshot is that the plane catches fire very easily, and it does not put fires out either. Even when you're not set alight, everything on this plane is extremely fragile. If there's one rule to keep in mind when flying this, it's simply don't get hit. Okay, into a test flight. Its roll speed is nice and snappy. Let's see what its elevators can do. After all, it's a Japanese fighter, therefore it can turn well, right? Well, it's not a great turner. The circle's wide, it's not close to catching its smoke trail either. Spitfire, Zeros and 109s all have much stronger elevators than this plane. How about the rudder? Well, it seems a little stronger than the elevator, but as I try to perform a climbing spiral here, the power of the engine takes over and sends me screaming upwards at quite a steep angle. Nothing wrong with that, it just gets the climbing spiral over too quickly. And at lower speed some planes have brilliant rudders, but not this. Once it's slowed down, the rudder becomes very weak. I would not recommend engaging in low speed combat in this plane if you can possibly avoid it. Its acceleration from low speed is also quite poor. Where its engine power really seems to shine is above 300 km an hour IAS, and below that it struggles. Okay, let's check its high speed handling. Its roll speed remains nice and fast, only slowing significantly past 550 km an hour IAS, and even then it remains serviceable. Let's look at the rudder response past 700 km an hour. Yes, it's not bad. And by the way, the plane can only reach the mid-700s, which while fast is not as quick as some of its competition, such as P-47s, the P-38 and the F-6F, all of which can get well over 800 km an hour. Next I'm seeing how much altitude it can recover in a zoom climb, which I started at a height of 1,000 metres. It gains 2.3 kilometres before dropping below 200 km an hour, which is fairly good. I'm going to continue right up into a stall hammerhead. The rudder isn't strong enough to flip the plane over sideways. It wants to fall over backwards instead, so I give up and I level the plane out. And as you can see, its low speed handling is really sloppy, and how painfully long it takes to recover. The worst case scenario on this plane is being caught at the top of a zoom climb as you run out of energy. You really are a sitting duck if you allow that to happen. So in combat, it's vitally important to keep your plane fast. The best way to do that is boom and zoom, which is what the J2M2 excels at. This is in fact the first dedicated boom and zoom interceptor in the Japanese lineup. And you should climb and look to boom and zoom no matter what battle type it is. In this case it's a domination map. I'm unsuccessful on my first pass here due to the unreliable cannons, which I'll discuss later. And then I'm extending away and keeping my speed high at all times as I move through the combat zone. I only climb when I'm sure I'm clear, and never on too steep an angle, as that'll kill my speed. When I'm safe, I'm levelling off at only 1500 metres in this battle, as all the action is down the deck, and then I'll start another attack run. It's a very simple tactic, easy to master, one I've demonstrated in plenty of other videos, and the J2M2's excellent high-speed handling and the abundance of speed it retains in the zoom climb makes it an ideal plane to use in this way. Well, the stars didn't align for me on that run, but I'm going to stay disciplined and extend away. Under no circumstances will I get greedy and turn to dogfight a target. You can actually play this way right from the outset in this plane, even when it's at stock level, as it can climb and boom and zoom right out of the box. This tactic keeps your time in the combat zone to a minimum, and as you're moving at such high speed, the chance of taking damage from stray bullets is minimal, which is what you need in such a fragile and flammable plane. Okay, let's see if I actually manage to score some kills in my third pass. The Ki-61s is an easy target for a close range deflection shot, then on to the Spitfire for a second kill. Then I hit WEP to speed away from the dogfight while checking my SIGs. There's a new wave approaching, so I'll wait until they engage the furball before I go for diving in for another attack. Okay, I'm going to go for the Junkers 88 first. And then as I extend away, I plan to switch to the Dornier, which is just off the top of the screen. Oh, there it is there. Okay. All the while keeping my speed as high as I possibly can. Alright, no luck on the Junkers there, so onto the Dornier. Staying low until I'm close to guns range. That keeps me fast, and then I pull up to attack. And level out to extend away again. Always expect that someone can run you down. As I return for another attack, I notice a Ki-61 lurking at 1500 metres altitude instead of diving in. And while I watch him, a BF-109E from beneath decides to helicopter up. So I use the rudder to drop straight over into a dive. I haven't got the energy to fight him. I don't know how much energy he has. So I'm going to lead him away to a more isolated area of the battlefield. First I want to gain a bit of a distance from him before deciding what to do next. Which I can do easily enough. He was already a bit low on energy from climbing up to attack me. And I'm watching the Ki-102 as well. I want to see if this is going to be a 2-on-1 or just me versus the 109. Ki looks like he's flying away. So I could keep running and then slowly climb to get above the 109, but the battle will end before that happens. So instead I decide to take him on. Now first I'm going to use this next web cycle to climb as hard as I can, but not on a particularly steep angle, as that would kill my speed, and he'd be onto me in a flash. This climb is restoring my energy advantage, which will allow me to dictate the terms of the engagement and force him to dogfight at low speed. I judge that I've gone far enough, and I take the risk of turning back and flying above him, and that does kill my speed straight away. I hope he's close to stalling, but he isn't. He's able to climb and force me to go to a head-on. I'm very lucky to have damaged him and not take damage myself or even lost my plane. He's turned onto me again. Remember, his elevators are better than mine. He hasn't the energy, though, to keep his nose up. He is now very slow, and that's what lets me get guns on him the third time, because I still had a fair bit of speed up. The lesson here is, if in doubt, just keep your speed high and run away. It's not worth taking the risk to try and dogfight. Here's a similar example, but this time I was a better judge of my opponent's energy. I'm starting off with your standard boom and zoom attack, then extending low and fast toward friendly territory, and I see Tracer flicking past, and looking back, there's a P-39 chasing me. I dodge a little to avoid copying a stray round, and I'm concentrating on climbing while keeping the speed nice and high. Quick check, and so it shows me the P-39's falling back. So I go into a climbing spiral, as I don't want to leave him behind. I want him greedy for the kill. You can see that's brought him closer, but now he starts to fall away again, indicating he's close to stalling, so I rudder over to attack. And now his nose has dropped, so he's definitely stalled, and I can finish him off. So that one worked out well, but there's one plane you must be extremely careful of, and that's any type of Spitfire at pretty much any altitude. I've missed my shot at that Spit, then I'm extending away and climbing at a decent speed, knowing he'll have to turn 180 degrees to follow me, and he'll be low on energy. But I'll let my speed drop below 300 km an hour as I climb. Now I'm very slow, and I've turned to see the Spitfire within guns range and closing in. I have no choice but to perform an emergency hammerhead, but there's no escaping my fate. I'm pretty sure I mentioned how flammable this plane is. Well, there's an example. And if you don't catch a light, even notoriously poor machine guns such as those on the SM-79 can rip your glass wings off. This is another example when I thought I'd be able to stall the plane out, only to be betrayed by the fast loss of speed when you drop under 300 km an hour. As you might expect, attacking bombers is a very dangerous pastime in this plane. Here I spent just a few seconds behind a Beaufort. That was all it took to turn my plane into a barbecue. Nice lag burst there. Okay, it was here. I should have broken off. I went for that last shot. You just can't take the risk. Once alight, you can turn the engine off and cut throttle, go into dives or manoeuvres. Doesn't matter what you do. The fire will kill your plane. It's not just bombers with 50 cal gunners you need to worry about. In most fighters I'd be perfectly safe sitting on the tail of a whirly like this. In a J2M2 you must immediately break off. The odds of catching a light are just far too high. Even a deflection attack doesn't guarantee your safety. Here I made sure that I was attacking from underneath, but all it takes is a single 7.6mm bullet to ruin your day. Actually, because fire is so lethal, there's one thing you should do, which I didn't in these examples. If someone sets you alight, just ignore it. Continue on and shoot them down or ram them if you can't shoot them down. You're wasting your time doing anything else. Anyway, enough with the doom and gloom. So far I haven't discussed its performance at high altitude. Now, even as a stock plane, the J2M2 will reach 3,700 metres in 2 webs from a 2,000 metre spawn, travelling at its ideal climbing speed, which is pretty high, between 270 and 280 km an hour IAS. When it's fully researched, the plane will make it to 4,100 metres in 2 webs, which isn't as huge an improvement as I'd have expected compared to the performance boost many other planes receive. Carefully attacking a B-25 from underneath there, where its gunners can't hit me. If you keep the speed over 300 km an hour, it will quickly accelerate past 400. And up past 5,000 metres though, its performance does start to fall away. So if you push higher, you really have to focus constantly on keeping the plane fast, as once it slows down it takes quite a while to speed up again. Unlike many other planes, you can fly it up here even when it's in stock condition, as indeed my plane was in this example. And by the way, I had unusually good hit detection in this battle. In my experience, the default build is usually a complete waste of time. But I had to come back for a second pass on that zero, as unlike the J2M2, zeros can still put fires out. The cannons on this plane are the same Type 99s found on A6M3s and the A6M5. I'm using a 300 metre convergence, though I'm opening fire from as far away as 600 metres if I'm approaching a target quickly. And you've got to remember to aim well ahead of the lead indicator in this plane. I found the tracers to be the most effective belt, packed as they are with high explosive in every shell. And some people swear by the stealth belt, but for me they produce nothing but sparkles. It's a case of your mileage may vary. You'll need to experiment and find which belt works best for you. As I circle around here, I see another B-25 approaching. I'm going to repeat exactly the same tactic as I used on the B-25 earlier. I'm ducking down into a shallow dive, which increases my speed and lets me close in quickly, and may trick him into think I'm going for someone else and make him decide to climb. Which he does. He lifts up, he was going to dive and changed his mind. And now I'm lifting up when I'm getting close to guns range, and I can attack him from underneath where his gunner can't touch me. Hit detection was great in this game. And then a welly spawns in and I repeat the same tactic for a head-on attack from below. This still exposes me to one of his gunners, but on this occasion I was lucky. I escaped unharmed. The low yo-yo attack like this maximises the speed of the plane while you engage, so it's a tactic you should look to use as often as possible in a J2M2. And lastly, a simple boom and zoom on a climbing Ishak, as I press lower once the targets higher up started to peter out. Before I move on, I just want to revisit the effectiveness of the plane's cannons. If your experience is like mine, not every attack is going to look like this. Instead, you'll often have attack after attack where shells generate nothing but sparkles. You'll inflict critical damage on oil tanks, the cooling system, flaps, and my personal favourite, the central gear leg. If you live close to the servers, you probably won't have this problem, but for the rest of us, it does have a big impact on the effectiveness of this plane. There's another problem you'll face when you climb to bomber altitude in this plane, and that's how to handle enemy fighters that want to contest altitude supremacy. In this battle, an enemy P-51 picked me out early on and decided that I was his #1 target. I was more interested in this fleet of B-25s and hoped the Mustang would go for some of the juicy blue bombers flying past him, but no, it wasn't to be. I did have time to attack this bomber, approaching low from a 45-degree angle, but the cannons aren't doing much in this game, and I can only scratch his paint before having to turn away before he set me alight. Unfortunately, I couldn't do anything about the other B-25s which were right above me, as the P-51 would close in quickly if I tried to attack them. So the question is, how do I handle that Mustang? I couldn't outrun him, so I decided to try climbing, knowing that his high-altitude performance is even worse than mine. The alternative was facing him head-on, and trying to dodge the hail of 20mm Hispano shells, and then engage him in a dogfight if I survived. But I decided it was safer not to allow him a gun solution at all, instead trying to induce him to stall. However, I'm gradually losing speed in my effort to climb, and all the while he is closing in. I've learned from the earlier lessons against the Bf-109 and Spitfire, I'm not going to pull any sharp movements until I absolutely have to, as to do so would kill my speed very quickly. But it's nearly reached the point where I'm going to have to start turning and flying above him to make him lift into a vertical climb for a gun solution. If I don't, he's simply going to run me down. I'm trying to turn in gentle increments, squeezing the last ounce of performance out of my plane, giving him as much time as possible to lose his energy. And now it's crunch time as I lift up and turn above him. It's simply a question of whether he has the ability to go vertical or not. And as you can see, it was quite a close call for a couple of seconds. But no, that effort has stalled his plane. I cut my throttle and deployed flaps, as I know how poorly my plane will turn at these speeds, and I can't afford to miss this opportunity. The point is, you can see how hard I had to work in order to safely shoot down the Mustang that performs badly at high altitude and simply cannot dogfight. And that soaked up a lot of time and drove me a considerable distance from the battle, and had it been a Hellcat or Spitfire, I doubt I'd have succeeded. So due to the difficulty this has in hunting bombers and the challenge it faces if altitude is contested, I believe the J2M2 is more effective at 3,000 metres and below, where it can be used far more aggressively. This is a light vehicle's ground strike. There is no point in climbing too high. I'm simply going to look to engage one target after the next as quickly as I can, while I zip across the battlefield at high speed. These battles seldom last very long, so there really is no time to lose if I want to make any kind of impact. In the lull before the action starts, I'll put up my summary of how I believe the plane should be used. I'm sure you can read, so I won't bore you by repeating it all. Okay, diving in to engage a couple of fighters that are intent on strafing ground targets. No luck on the first one. And only a hit on the second. Now, seeing people use perfectly good fighters that way really does make me sad, even more so that the map design encourages that kind of behaviour. Okay, I'm all clear, so I loop over, turning my speed back into altitude, which I can then convert back into speed as I start the next diving attack. I'm easing off on the web, saving it for when it's really needed. As I travel across the line of battle, the P-40 is an obvious target, and I can easily hit him with a deflection shot. Immediately I'm looking for the next target, preferably one I can switch to without having to turn very far, as any kind of turning will reduce my speed. I slowly bring the nose around while using WEP to intercept this diving buffalo. Keeping it nice and smooth. And that turn did drop me down into the 500s, even below soon, and now I'm heading into friendly territory, so it's a chance to reload and gain a little more altitude. Don't want to get too far away from the battle as no one's up here. Okay, ready to go. Uncle 112 is an obvious target to start with, but I decide to switch onto the Ki-45 that's trailing behind him. Because he's at the end of the line, I decide to risk a high yo-yo before dropping down for another attack to finish him off. Speed just below 500 km an hour, and plenty of ammo in the cannon, so I look for another target as I extend and climb. Left or right? I decide to go right simply because the enemies are a little closer that way. There's a high BB-1, I'll look to attack him, but first I'll deal with this BF-110, who has target vision, doesn't see me coming. Short burst, make sure I'm accurate. Okay. Now onto that high BB-1. Now there's another BB-1 right behind me, but it's better for me just to fly away and stick to my plan. There's no advantage to me in going for the extra kill and trying to dogfight him. I'll only get caught in a furball and shot down. I'm now at the side of the battle, and once again it's time to climb and reload. I have 5 kills already in just 2.5 minutes after I dive to engage my first targets, and nobody's taken a shot at me yet. That shows how effective this plane can be when used aggressively as a fast interceptor at low altitude. I spot a lone P-36 strafing ground targets underneath me. That's a kill I cannot refuse. But on this occasion my guns are apparently firing carrots rather than high explosive shells. And I have to pull up without even a critical to his central gear leg. And I think you can understand how frustrating this can be. I'm expecting to fly back again toward the main battle and leave him alone when I see that he's turned underneath me again. He's obviously paying me no attention whatsoever, given the paramount importance of shooting ground targets, I guess. But this time he's in a turn when I approach, which is enough to deny me a gun solution. So up into a high yo-yo, and then I'm attacking again. I need to finish this target, he's costing me too much time. And finally he's down. Lots more reds where he came from. I need to gain a little height, and now I'm ready to go hunting again, though I probably should have reloaded first. There's only 75 shells in the cannons left. Okay, big mob of enemies coming in. Into the diving approach. Now just to pick out a target, and I decide on the Ki-61. I roll the plane to help match his heading, and that's an easy kill. Try for a quick shot at this Ki-21, and then everyone else is moving at too sharp an angle and too quick to get a beat on. Now, there's only four ground targets left. I'm almost out of time in this battle, but now I have to wait as the cannons do need to reload. Should have reloaded them earlier. Okay, I should be reloaded by the time I'm back, so it's ready to start the next attack. Now coming in is a Yak-1 and a BF-109. I don't mind which of them I attack. It will be one of them though. The Yak's on fire and peeling off, so I'll go for the 109. Exposed himself to a nice deflection shot there. And that's all I could do before the battle ended, but I hope that this video has given you an idea of how to fly this plane, what its weaknesses are, and what it's capable of when flown to its strengths. At a battle rating of 3.3, the plane is undertiered, which becomes painfully obvious when you're on top of the matchmaking, as I was in this battle. I also have footage of a full air domination game which really demonstrates its capabilities, facing sub 3.0 rated opponents. I can upload that if people are interested. But that's all for this video. So keep your speed high, and I will see you in the skies.